Well, if we get the preacher's wife to take a seat, we'll get started. She was doing her preacher's wife duties. You need to take your purse with you? Oh, okay. I'm going to be in so much trouble when I get home. What would be any different than any other time? Good morning. It's good to see you all. We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. We did an introduction last week. We're going to get into the text this week, see how far we get. If we do as well as Bill did Wednesday night, which I doubt I will, we'll get through 4 verses. Enjoyed that class Wednesday night. I really did. Somebody asked me afterwards, he said, how'd you enjoy being a student in class? I loved it. I probably talked too much, though. No. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. The word preacher here is a title. It is not a name. As we talked about last week, it is the assembler, the one who called the assembly together, or in this case, based upon the end of the book, it may be in reference to the assembling of the wisdom of Solomon in this letter. But either way, he refers to himself as the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, let's talk about this a little bit and kind of rehash a little bit of last week's class. Many people see this as a dark or depressing book. I don't. I think it's very pragmatic. I think it's a very pragmatic look at life under the sun. And we talked a little bit about it in the lesson last hour. You know, all of the work that we do, and he's going to say this in verse 4, all of the work that we do here on earth, when it comes to the temporal work we do, right? Some of us are home builders. You know, some of us have done all kinds of different jobs. But eventually, those houses that you built fall down. New houses have to be built, right? For many, I mean, Bill's got a good job. I mean, because most people hair grows. He cuts their hair and it just comes right back. Except mine and Kurt's. And Mark's, and I start going around. Some of us are losing it. But I heard somewhere last week, just a little humor on this. Last week it said that hair was given to mankind to keep their heads warm. That means those of us who don't have hair are cool. You like that, Dane? Yeah. Or they're hot heads. No, I don't think that's what it meant, Phil. I don't think that's what it meant. But I do think it's a very pragmatic look at life. Solomon is going to talk here about wisdom. His wisdom. We'll get more into that in the last part of verses 12 and following. But he's going to use his wisdom to talk about the fact that possessions, labor, the wealth that we attain through our labors and our endeavors in this life, whether it be women, personal relationships. He's going to go through each one of these. And at the end, he comes to the conclusion that there's no real satisfaction. There's no lasting satisfaction in any of these things. And all the things in the temporal, physical realm, it's just vanity. He says here, going on in a few moments, that it's like grasping for wind, right? It's futile. In fact, in verse 3, he says, what advantage does man have in all of his work? There is no adequate gain. There's no lasting gain in his work. But everything, and I think this is important, everything that God has created, everything that God has blessed us with is a gift to be enjoyed. Would you agree with that? And we talked a little bit about this last week. The problem is when we put the wrong emphasis on those things. When we look at them from the wrong perspective. When we put our faith and our trust in those things. That's the problem. And Satan has corrupted almost every good gift of God in this world, hasn't he? And again, last week we talked about a little bit, and he's going to get more in depth into this later on. The sexual relationship is something that is good, and it's to be enjoyed. But how? How? Within the bonds of marriage, one man, one woman for life. And that's a beautiful thing, and it's a good thing. But what has our world done with it? Our world has corrupted it, made it into something that God never intended, and made people believe that they could find fulfillment and satisfaction in those things. And all they find is heartbreak and disappointment. Right? But it's faith. It's faith in God and in laboring for Him that really has lasting satisfaction and effects and satisfaction. Eternal effects. Any thoughts or comments on all of that?
Just one quick thought. I read a little bit of a synopsis of this kind of commentary.
Mm-hmm.
What they do just a little bit is they talk about the main theme of this is life without God leads to emptiness, futility, and lack of significance.
That's right.
God, all that we have is vanity, it's worthless, it's empty.
Yeah. It's verse 2. Let's look at it. After the introduction, he begins saying, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. One commentator named Fox, he said that the word vanity here means it's futile or it's senseless or absurd. All of life separated from, when you look at the things of this life and you try to find fulfillment and satisfaction in those things, it's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Yes.
But I think that there's probably, it struck me that it's like, I thought no book in the Old Testament spoke more to me about our modern state of living than Ecclesiastes. It was like, because, you know, the bad part, or the good part about not having all of our needs met is that lots of times it leads to dependence on God, or realization.
Yes.
But once we have our needs met, and we've all, in our country, a vast majority of us are the level of what would have been luxurious living throughout most of human history.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get to this point that we're to the point Solomon is, average Joe in America is like, and that's never been the case in history, but now it is. And you have this crisis of feeling like, well, what's my purpose? Like when you worry about having food, literally food on the table, not food you want on the table, but just food. Well, that can keep you going. You know, you wake up in the morning, you're like, I get out of bed because I got to go to work and I need to put that food. There will not be food if I do not go to work today.
Right.
But when you reach a point to where you know, okay, it's not about that. I have transportation. I have, and transportation not even a need, but I'm saying
Right.
I have these things. And then you say, what's the point of anything? You suddenly wake up and it's like you no longer, I think that's one reason we have so much depression and anxiety.
Oh, sure.
And I think it really speaks to that we're living a life of a king in a sense.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're facing this existential crisis more now than ever.
Are we too blessed? Can we be too blessed? I mean, I'm spoiled. Don't say, I knew she was going to say something. But we're all spoiled, aren't we? In this society, especially in American society and culture, And maybe we've forgotten the dependence on God, that we become so self-sufficient. Now, I'll take issue with one thing you said. Israel, after they're taken out of Egyptian bondage, God leads them into what? A land of flowing with milk and honey. They didn't have to work for the crops because they were already there. I mean, the text tells us that the grapevines were full, the wheat was there, there were flocks and herds. God gave them all of this, right? And it's almost like they were like we are. In the sense that God had just showered all these blessings on, and they forgot their dependency on Him.
I agree with you. In comparison to what they had, they were living life luxury. But I think today we're so in that much more luxury that if you were to give us a bunch of honey and a bunch of cows out here that were alive.
Well, yeah, it's all.
And say, oh, here you go.
It's all perspective, and it's in perspective and in the cultural setting, right? Going from the slavery that they were in Egypt to that was paramount to what we're talking about. In fact, one commentator said he believes Solomon was prophetically foreseeing the grim future awaiting his kingdom, the temple, and the Jewish people, and declared that everything man does is vain and transitory. It was almost like Solomon is in this letter is saying the same thing to his people that you just said. We've forgotten our dependency on God. And we've put our faith and our trust in all these blessings that we have instead of the one who gave us the blessings, right? And in that sense, I think there's probably some truth to that. Great points, though. In Psalm 144 and verse 4. Psalm 144 and verse 4 says, man is like a breath, his days are like a passing shadow. What does James tell us? James chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. It's a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away, right? So look at verse 3. What advantage does man have in all his work? The word work here, some translations I think translate it labor. Is that right? In the Hebrew, it's a negative term. In its noun form and its verb form, it's a negative word. He's talking about the work, the end of verse 3, which is done under the sun. He's talking about the earthly existence. Okay? Again, you build a house, how long will that house stand? You know, our house, sometimes I think our house is on its last leg, right? It's been there a while. No? It's been there a while. But you drive around the countryside of Mississippi, and what do you see? You see some old houses that have been there for a long time, and they're grown over, and they're falling down, falling in. Neglect, right? Yeah, it is. But
You wonder how long your house will last. How long
well, and that may be true too.
That's the same way with our Christian
Sure,
walk.
sure. But eventually that house is going to get torn down. 300, 400, 500 years. Earth will still be rotating. And listen to what he says. Verse 4, a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The earth keeps going. I love genealogies. I've become kind of the family historian in my family, and I've had several of my family reach out to me and say, hey, can you share with me, some of our genealogies here or there? And I've done a lot of research, and some has been very productive. I've been able to trace some of my family back, many hundreds of years ago. But there's some going back maybe 4 or 5 generations, and it's gone. There's no remembrance. There's no gravestones. And To me, that's kind of sad, isn't it? To think that I could die today and then in 5, 6 generations, there'd be no remembrance of me whatsoever.
Amen.
Burl speaking from experience. It probably won't take Burl more than 1 generation.
Not that far.
Not that far. But I think that's what he's saying here, Burl. Life just goes. Generation comes, generation goes. And we're forgotten. But the world keeps turning. And so the things that we do in this life, if we put all of our expectation for meaning and purpose in the things that we're doing in this life, it's vanity. It's meaningless.
Tim, I read a comment on this back and forth with the guy. He said it's like Solomon described it on a treadmill. Running, no far apart. You go to work, you get strength, buy food.
Did you hear that? Stay off the treadmill. That's what I heard.
You go to work, buy food, get strength, you go to work.
To buy food, to get strength. Yeah. Now that thought, you have to have a car to go to work, but you have to have a job to buy the car. I mean, yeah, absolutely. All the emphasis is on the physical, the tangible things of life. Yes, Rick.
You know, verse 4 it says there, but the earth provides forever, but forever here is still a temporary term.
That's right.
I've had some folks say, that's a contradiction, but it's really not.
Yeah, that great point, Richard. Forever here doesn't mean, it's kind of like when some Old Testament prophecies say this will last forever. He means forever during this period of time, this age, right? Because there is a day coming, and eventually I think Solomon gets to that here, right? The day is coming where even the earth and all the works therein will be burned up. We'll talk about that next hour. And we need to be prepared for that day. And if all we're doing, Richard, is putting our faith and our meaning and our purpose in the things of this life, what's going to happen when that is all burned up and gone? Then it's vanity, it's meaningless in everything we did here. Good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. Let's, where did I leave off? Verse 4? Verse 5 then. Also the sun rises and sun sets, the hastening and hastening to its place, and it rises again. And then he talks about the sun and this cycle, right? The earth continues, the sun rises in the east, sets in the west, then it comes back up in the east again, sets, it just keeps going. The wind toward the south, then turning toward the north, the winds continue to swirl along on its circular courses. The wind returns. The rivers flow into the sea, and yet the sea is not full. To the place where the river flows again, there they flow again. So what's he talking about there? Talking about the water cycle, isn't he? The water flows to the sea, evaporates, goes up into the clouds, moves, falls, fills the... There's a cycle, and it just keeps going. It just keeps going. Verse 8 then. All things are wearisome. Man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Now, he's going to get more into this here in a moment with regard to the idea of wisdom. But I think what he's saying in verse 8, on the heels of what he just said about this pattern of life in the world that just keeps going, is that if you stop and you just look at that, if you stop and just look at and think about the idea of the sun rising and the sun setting, and the water cycle and how it just, and you think about meaning and purpose in life, and that's all you see, and that's all you think about, it makes no, it's wearisome. It's what's he say? The eye is not satisfied. That's not enough. The ear for hearing the wind to blow or the birds to chirp and sing, it's not enough. And the Bible tells us that God has placed eternity within us all. Right? He's placed eternity in us all. That's why every society of mankind that has ever existed has always had some form of worship. Something that is more existential than this temporal world that we live in. Why? Because if you just focus on the temporal world, it doesn't satisfy. There has to be something greater. There has to be purpose. There has to be meaning. What is it? What is it? Verse 9. That which has been is that which has been is that which will be. You know what he said there? It is what it is. It is what it is. When I look at the world and all the things and how people act and how people live and how the world continues to grow, it is what it is. From a physical perspective. Yes, Richard.
How much a man does to change all these things.
That's right.
The wind, the turning of the earth, and the water, the way the water cycle works. How much influence?
Well, yeah. Well,
Trying all the time, and we don't have a lot of influence on that.
well, and I think that's right.
It is what it is.
We don't have that kind of influence on it. Let's finish this verse and then talk more about that, Richard. He says, that which has been done is that which will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. Wars, disasters, natural disasters. I don't want to get political here, so don't get me wrong with this. But when it comes to natural disasters, things aren't any worse than they've always been.
So there's not much, you're not putting much stock in the climate change.
I'm not saying anything about that.
Well, I'm asking you.
Well, we'll talk about that later, Burl. But the fact is, there's always been tornadoes. There's always been hurricanes. I think when it comes to our perspective in our day and age, and it may go back a little bit to what Clint was saying, because of the world that we live in today, when I grew up, when most of us grew up, how many television channels? Well, except for Burl, who had no television.
Amen.
How many channels did we have? 3, maybe 4 if you could get PBS to come in. Right?
Got up and changed channels.
And my dad hit me with a shoe, and I got up and changed the channel. Right? You had to go here, move the rabbit ears so you could get it in clear, and I had to stand there and hold it with tinfoil. Right? But my point is, get me off track. The point is what? If something happened in California at 10 o'clock that morning, we didn't hear about it until 6 o'clock that night or 11 o'clock on the news that night, or maybe not at all. Or till it came out of the weekly newspaper and it was on page 6 and you were only worried about the comics page. But now if something happens, how soon do we know about it? Within seconds. Videos are out there all over social media, and there's news reports, and it drives me crazy. Sometimes I'll open these news reports on something that's happened, and I'll read through it, and nobody's editing this stuff. The errors, the grammar errors in it. And you know why? Because they have to be the first one to get it out. They have to be the first one to get it out. They have to get the scoop, right? They have to be, but that's the society we live in. And so we're more aware of it, we see more of it, and so we think there's more of it. There's not. It's no different than it's always been. Wars, disaster, human achievements. Somebody says, well, we've never had a space shuttle before, but what did we have before the space shuttle? Airplanes. What did we have before? The Wright brothers. Well, what did we have before that? You know, the kite was invented in China in 400 BC. But what did we have before the kite was invented? Birds. Who made birds? And the idea of flight and the science of flight. God, the principle's the same. It's always been there.
Well, and our own advancements, like, which I mean, you know, like say it's not what you're talking about. I mean, it's all just in the sense of the concept. I mean, whether we got
Right.
a shuttle or whether it's an airplane or whether it was
A bird.
Yeah, back in the day, it was all people seeking and there's nothing wrong with it. We do
No.
that, but we seek to like tame nature. We seek
Yeah.
to like in talking about the natural disasters. Well, like I think of like Katrina down there in New Orleans and stuff. Well, we had the capability that maybe you never had through history of building those levees up and preventing flooding year after year. You know, all along the Delta. And then the consequence was that, you know, the levee keeps getting higher, and then the city is sinking in comparison to the levee. Well, when nature and when God, when what Solomon's saying comes true, when it's like no matter what you do,
Right.
certain things, nature's going to win out in the end. So you can only build the levee so high before it just becomes the right storm hits.
Well, let me ask you this: why did they have to build a levee in the first place?
To prevent the flood.
Why?
Because they were below sea.
Because they're below sea level. When you build a city below sea level, bad things happen.
On the sea.
Yeah, right? That's why I tell people, you know what? If you jump off a 30-story building, you're going to crash. I'll die before I ever hit the ground. I'll have a heart attack, right? I mean, because what? Gravity, every time. It's not the suggestion of gravity. It's the law of gravity. It works every time. And when we even through our modern achievements, when we go beyond what God in the natural order of things has always, then bad things happen. Our bodies are not made to climb into a 2,000-pound automobile and hurl ourselves 70 miles an hour down a road. If you crash, bad things are going to happen, right?
And back up your point about the fact that there's nothing new. Well, when we put off the yearly flooding, but when it finally breaks, then we have such a populated city and everything else.
That's right.
It's going to seem that you can say legitimately, well, we had more people get killed in this flood than
Right.
Well, why?
Yeah, why?
You put off this and build and set it up.
It goes back to what Mark was saying earlier about maintenance and continual maintenance and that kind of thing. Because things deteriorate, things fall apart, right? We're not, and this is one of those things about creation versus evolution that we talk about another time, but we are not becoming more cohesive and more orderly. What are we doing? We're expanding. We're becoming more disorderly. The universe is expanding. It's deteriorating. It's falling. It's not becoming more ordered. It's becoming less ordered. Right? Verse 10. Is there anything which one might say, see, this is new. Already it has existed for ages, which were before us. There is no remembrance of earlier things, and also the latter things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. Again, going back to what I said earlier, one of these days I'm going to die. And I've talked about for years, I've got plans, I've had plans to write some books and stuff. And I had somebody years ago tell me, well, you'll never make any money writing books. I don't plan to. I want to leave something, and this is where I think he's going with this. My own personal take on this is I want to leave something spiritual behind for the next generation and the next generation. So that when I'm gone, I can still be teaching, sharing. Because that's the only thing that really matters. If I put my faith and my trust and my existence and my purpose, my meaning all in worldly things, when I'm gone, it's gone. There's no remembrance of earlier things. Any other thoughts or comments on that before we get into the last few verses here, verses 12 through 18? Somebody say something while I take a drink. Somebody say something? Y'all wanted to talk. Now, see, they all talk too much Wednesday night. We're going to have to change something. All right. All right. Thoughts, comments, anything else? Verse 12. He's talking here and now about the futility or the grief, really. And I think this is somewhat humorous, not ha-ha funny, but interesting funny, right? What does Solomon ask for? We talked about this last week. He asked for wisdom, not just wisdom to be the most wise man in all the world, but wisdom to do what? To judge the people, to rule God's people. And God gives him this wisdom. And now, after all these years, looking back on it, it's almost careful what you ask for. Because he's saying, with all this wisdom, it brought some grief. It brought some real grief to Solomon to have this wisdom. Maybe to understand some things that, you know what, Solomon's saying, I kind of wish I never understood. Right? You ever thought that? Well, I wish I had never known that. Ignorance is bliss sometimes. He said, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven or under the sun. So, let me ask you this. Let me finish the verse. He says, it is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. What's that? What is the grievous task? It is to have wisdom and to explore things concerning what is done under heaven. Because again, it's grasping at wind. It's trying to understand what only really God can understand. Right? And so, it seems to me like he's saying here. Go back, Ricky, what did we say? He asked for wisdom for what purpose? To rule the people. To judge righteously. To rule the people. But then he says here, I took the wisdom and I decided instead of, because this is kind of what happened, instead of using the wisdom that God blessed Solomon with to be a righteous ruler and judge of his people, what did Solomon end up doing with the wisdom God gave him? Well, he says here, I used it to try to figure out the things of this world. And what happened to Solomon? What happened to his kingdom? He ended up losing it all, didn't he? And after his death, what happens to the kingdom? Is divided between the north and the south, between Rehoboam, Jeroboam, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. Several hundred years later, Israel, the northern kingdom, is carried away into Assyrian captivity. And then the southern kingdom of Judah is carried away into Babylonian captivity. And the kingdom was never the same again. But what if Solomon would have not given himself over to the wives, to the false worship, to all the things that he allowed himself to be distracted by?
He saw pleasure,
Yeah,
satisfaction in a lot of things. Wisdom being one of them. Wisdom
That's right.
for the sake of wisdom.
and that's kind of what he's saying here, isn't it?
Riches, we go on with a lot of this stuff as we go through this, but, every one of these failed because every one of them took it a step further away from God.
That's right. That's exactly right. So in verse 14, he says, I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, it is all vanity and striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Isaiah chapter 40. Turn over there with me real quick. Keep your finger there. Ecclesiastes 1. Isaiah chapter 40. My study Bible here has a heading at chapter 40 that says the greatness of God. What Isaiah is talking about here is how great God is above everything else. Verse 1, comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem. Call out to her that her welfare has ended, that her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice is calling. Clear the way of the Lord in the wilderness. Make smooth in the desert a highway for our God. Let every valley be lifted up and every mountain and hill be made low. And let the rough ground become a plain and let the rugged terrain a broad valley. Then the glory of the Lord will be revealed and all the flesh will see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. A voice says, call out. Then he answered, what shall I call out? All flesh is grass, and all its loveliness is like the flower of the field. The grass withers and the flower fades. When the breath of the Lord blows upon it, surely the people are grass. Man cannot make that which is crooked straight. That which is rough smooth. Only God can do that. Only God can take what is perverse and make it clean. And only God can take the things of this world and make meaning out of them. And only God can give us purpose and meaning in life and in eternity. When we try to do it of our own volition, of our own wisdom, of our own knowledge, of our own hand, you ever take a piece of metal that was crooked and try to make it straight? How hard is that to do? And I don't know that it can ever be perfect like it was before. Right. Dean can probably give us some help on this. A lot of times you have to use fillers or you have to do a lot of other stuff to manipulate it. Can it ever be perfect again? You can make it almost perfect, right? Almost. But only God can make it perfect. I think that's what he's saying here. Good point. Anybody else? The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. Yes. Yep. Okay. So I said to myself, now this is Solomon speaking again. Now after kind of this introduction and sharing this idea that wisdom and all that he has sought meaning for and all that, he says to himself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realized that this also was striving after wind, because in much wisdom there is much grief. And increasing knowledge results in what? Increasing pain. The more you know. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't learn? We shouldn't grow in wisdom and knowledge? Well, what's he saying? Back up. He said again, I observed, verse 16, wealth of wisdom and knowledge. My mind has observed all this. I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. Again, I think he's saying here, I thought that if I could figure stuff out, if I could understand why men acted the way they did, why the things were the way they were, that it would give me some purpose and meaning out of life. And I realized, have you ever looked at a situation? Have you ever I saw a video yesterday, and I couldn't help but see this video and think, what are these people doing? Have you ever just looked at it and thought, what foolishness? I don't understand. I just don't understand. You see evil. Now, I don't know if he did it or not, but this guy that they've arrested for killing those 4 kids out in Idaho? Why? What would prompt somebody to do such evil?
One thing about that, Tim, bad, people commit suicide.
Yeah.
Serial killers and stuff. I don't want to know what causes them to feel like that.
And I think that's what Solomon is saying here. Solomon's saying, I took this wisdom that God gave me and I observed all these things to try to figure it out, and I can't figure it out. And all it does is cause grief. All it does is cause grief.
You know, when you study, I remember, I guess when I was in college, but you study like gifted students and things like that, and intelligence and stuff, and you'll read, and you'll be like, and they've done extensive studies on it, it'll be like, you have a higher incidence of anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
like anxiety-related disorder.
Right.
And it just correlates with, like, to a degree, there are exceptions, of course, there's a general rule, as your IQ increases, then the level of anxiety will also increase. And
That's why I have so much anxiety.
well, I mean, as you said, no ignorance is bliss. If you think without meaning you necessarily.
No, it's okay.
But if you think about it, I mean, if you ever meet a truly anxious person, usually, 9 times out of 10, who has not got sense enough to think about, they're thinking ahead. The further
Right,
they can
yeah.
think ahead, the more they have to worry about. There's more
Yeah.
unknown possibilities to the truth.
Yeah.
And so if you can only think what's the step right in front of you, well, you're pretty happy as long as you know you can make that step. But if you're thinking about 100 steps out, then you see all the things that can go wrong on every step you take, and all the things that can affect it, and all the chaos of the world.
And I think that's it. I wrote here in my notes with regard to verse 15, where we talked about the crooked cannot be straightened and the lack cannot be counted. No amount of investigation or using the earth's resources will ever straighten things out of this life that are crooked, perverse, twisted, or turned upside down. And when we try to figure it out, when we try to find a way, and that's our existence, our purpose is in, I'm going to find a way to make this straight. I'm looking in the future and I'm going to figure, it's futile.
Of course, it's the balance. Because
Yeah.
you're like, oh,
Well, and we talked about that a little bit last week as far as, that doesn't mean that we don't work and provide and invest and save and do, and we're not good stewards and are wise, but there does have to be that balance there. Anybody else? Yes. Take no thought for tomorrow. Today has enough, right? I've got enough to worry about right now. And so that doesn't mean I don't think about retirement or, make plans, but my main focus is I just got to get through today. Because if I don't get through the day, that's not going to matter anyway. Right? Anybody else? Bell's about to ring. All right, that's chapter 1. Thank you. Appreciate the good discussion.